All right. In this video, I want to talk about two women. Now, what is interesting is that generally when we read about women in the scriptures, especially when it's prophetic, a woman refers to a church or an assembly of people, right? So when you have, for example, in Revelation chapter 12 and then in Revelation 17, you have a representation of two women. We see them as the true church and the apostate church, such as the virgin in Revelation chapter 12, we can see as a pure woman, right? But in Revelation 12, that doesn't represent the Christian church, but the pure gathering of Israel. Because this woman has a crown of 12 stars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And she gives birth to Jesus. And it's not Mary. Mary personifies Israel, but in Revelation 12, this woman has to flee away from the dragon after Jesus ascends to heaven. Mary didn't have to run away from Satan the dragon after Jesus ascended to heaven, right? So this woman represents a group of people, just like in Revelation 17, we have another woman, but she is a harlot. And on her name is written Babylon, right? There's a more to it, but the main point of it is Babylon. And this woman rides the beast, and there's something interesting about this, because last night there was just a bunch of thoughts coming into my head, because what I've been doing lately is I've been setting up either my phone or another recording of with the Bible on it, the KJV audio Bible, and I have it set low, where if you're awake and you're paying attention, you can hear it, but when you start to fall asleep, it's not loud enough to keep you awake. So I listen to it as I fall asleep, and then, sometimes when you wake up, whether you got to go to the bathroom, you just wake up, I'll sit and just listen to where it's at and fall back to sleep. And doing so, it's, keeps my mind focused on God, focused on His Word. And last night I was having all these different thoughts coming to me about what I'm going to talk about here. And it starts here in Galatians chapter 4, where Paul is talking about two covenants. A covenant that started at Mount Sinai, which gendered the bondage, and then a covenant that actually started before with Abraham and Isaac, and it's a covenant of promise. So one is a condition and one is just accepting the promise, right? Faith and works separated. And here, Paul says at verse 25, "For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children." Because he's given a reference to Abraham's first child, where they tried to fulfill God's promise on their own, right? Showing based on man's works. And they brought forth Ishmael through Agar. And Paul is talking about how this represents that first covenant with Israel, the Hebrews, the Jews. And they're in bondage now to Jerusalem. And you notice that when it mentions Jerusalem here, it says that she's in bondage with her children. It's referring to that city of Jerusalem as a her and having children. And then it goes on to say at verse 26, but Jerusalem which is above is free, which is the mother of us all. And there we go with another representation of Jerusalem being a woman, but this is a heavenly, spiritual, godly Jerusalem that we read about in Revelation. So, thinking about this, which is odd, is last night what I was listening to was actually stuff from the Old Testament. And it wasn't anything to do with where I'm at here. But I was seeing, okay, we get two cities, which are two women. And we see this in Revelation 21. We read about at verse 2. Let me highlight that there. This chapter is pretty much about this city here. And it says, and I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. See, we see this again as the Jerusalem that is the mother of us all that are true Christians coming down from heaven, right? And what was coming to me was, when we go over here to Revelation 17, we read about this harlot, right? And it says here at verse 5 of Revelation 17, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And in Revelation 21, where we read about the city of New Jerusalem, has the foundations are written the names of the 12 apostles, and on the gates, there's 3 gates towards the north, south, east, and west, and on each gate is the names of the 12 tribes. But here, we have Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now, we also read when we come down here at verse, where does it say here? The last verse, verse 18. It says, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Now, since people see this woman as a city and it rules over the people of the earth, a lot of people have speculated that, all right, this has to do with who's running the earth. So people will say things like, oh, Rome, because it says that this woman sits on 7 mountains, right? And Rome sits on 7 hills, right? So they're like, oh yeah, right there, Rome. And Rome, through the Vatican, which is a city-state, it's both a kingdom and the head of a church, has its power over all the nations because it has members of its religion in all countries, and they have an influence on the country, whether they are voters or in politics themselves. Right? And this right there, obviously, even though some would argue they don't rule over the world, that is a very strong influence. Not to mention that Roman law runs England and America ever since the American Revolution, where they were common law countries. But after they were manipulated to fight against each other, in what I call not the American Revolution, but the Catholic Revolution, because in both these nations before the American Revolution, Rome was actually outlawed in both the America and in England. But after the American Revolution, that changed, and now Catholicism is the largest denomination in America, where before it was outlawed. So ever since that happened, the America and England have become more and more totalitarian, right? They've got away from common law and introduced Roman law, and they basically became part of the Roman Empire. So a lot of people have speculated, like England, London, the city of London, and even a lot of people would look at New York as this city, right? And that makes some sense where they see the Statue of Liberty. A lot of people are understanding now that that is an idol, right? A giant idol. After the American Revolution, Catholic France gave it to America, right? I know France had their revolution and everything, but anyway, we know who's behind the scenes, because people will resist when you openly come out, right? But if you pretend, like now with this ecumenical movement where the Protestants are all basically going back to Rome, people are all for it. But if it was the Catholic Church trying to bring everybody back in openly to their church, people would fight against it. But since they're doing it through the Protestant denominations, people are all, for some reason, blind to it, and they don't resist, right? But anyway, with the Statue of Liberty, people have also seen that this is from a painting from a French painter of Lucifer, where he also has a chain that's broken free around his ankles, and he's holding up a flaming torch in his right hand, and he has this crown on his head as well. And they're like, it's just a picture, it's a statue of this picture of Lucifer, and they put it in the middle of the city, and people call it a woman, right? So Babylon, right? A man being called a woman, that would be Babylon, because Babylon, why I've been staying here so long, is confusion. We take a look here. Oh, I am not connected, so I have to turn the Wi-Fi on. So if messages come up, I'm sorry about that. But let me brighten this up. I'm sorry that it was so dim for this whole video. I wasn't thinking. I hope you were still able to see everything that I was posting here. But let's go to the interlinear concordance here. And let's go down to this word for Babylon, G8897. Right, let's click on it here. And you notice where it says the first point here. Can I highlight here? Yes. Babylon equals confusion. Right? And something I found interesting here is the first mention of confusion in the scriptures. Look at the reference here. I'm going to open it up just to make it bigger. And I'll highlight it. Neither shalt thou lie with any beast to defile thyself therewith. Neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie down thereto. It is confusion. So you see that this has to do with a woman having sexual relations with a beast. And here we read in Revelation 17 about a woman who rides the beast, whose name is Babylon, or confusion. And thoughts were coming to me again about videos I made in the past about Egypt rising. And I thank you for bearing with me in this video, because it's all going to come together to this conclusion of something that may possibly be happening, going to happen soon. But anyway, this video or a few videos I made about Egypt rising in the past, where I was mentioning some points about how it seems like Egypt is kind of spread all over and kind of rising up again. And I was talking about how their depictions of their gods were half man, half animal, right? So that was the kind of mixture you would get with for example, a woman laying with a beast, right? Or even a man laying with a beast. That would still be confusion. Not that we can mate with animals, but if you were to do so, with scientific experimentations and what have you, you would create chimera, these abominations, these creatures of half man, half beast, and that would be part of Babylon, confusion, right? And when we read back over here about this city of New Jerusalem, we read about its dimensions here. Let's see, down at verse 16, he gives a measurement of the city. Now, the measurement is not what we're going to focus on. What we're going to focus on, the fact is that the three measurements are equal, right? Because it says here in verse 16, at the end of the verse, it says the length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. So we would say, like, the length, height, and depth, right? That's what we would say instead of breadth. So the three dimensions, it says they are equal, right? So the measurement doesn't matter here. We're not going to get into the size of this thing, because this thing seems to be gigantic, right? And I think I can turn that off now. No more interruptions. And that would mean that there's only two shapes this city can be in. It's either a cube, right? Because a cube, its length, height, and depth are all equal. Like a dice, a die, I should say, dice or die. It's equal. But there's another shape that has the same dimensions. Or not the same dimensions, the same height, length, and depth, but not being a cube, and that would be a pyramid. So it's quite possible that this shape is a pyramid. So now you would understand why the thoughts of Egypt rising came to mind here. Because I was wondering how people, especially that there's going to be a lot of Christians that they don't believe the gospel. For example, I used to be a Seventh-day Adventist, so I know the Seventh-day Adventists are well aware of this passage right here, right? They're very much aware of this, as they believe that we go through the 7-year tribulation and have to resist the mark of the beast at all costs, and that God is going to provide for you, even by ravens out in the wilderness like Elijah, and that's how he's going to sustain you as you survive for this period of time. And it'll be rough, right? Because you got to let go of the way your life is now, with all the comforts and amusements and food that you can normally have, especially, if you're an American. And you're going to have to go through all this. And then Jesus returns at the end of the 7 years, destroys basically all life on earth for the most part, at least all people, and takes all the survivors with him to heaven for 1,000 years. They don't believe he reigns here on earth, even though the scriptures are clear that he reigns on earth here for 1,000 years, especially when you compare Revelation to the Old Testament about him returning and setting up the millennial kingdom. But they believe we go to heaven for 1,000 years and then return with him, with this city, to then establish this reign on a new heavens and a new earth. Right? And then there's other Christians, denominations that are also aware of this passage as well, and they'll explain it in different ways. Some focus on it more than others. Some dismiss it more than others. So how is Satan going to convince everybody, oh, yeah, I'm Jesus and I'm returning? And you're going to be like, okay, where's this city here? Right? So, everybody calls him Antichrist, right? Because he's another Christ, right? He's trying to be like Jesus. That's why when you read here in Revelation 19, starting at verse 11, you read about Jesus returning on a white horse. He has many crowns and he has a sword, the sword of his mouth, the word of God, right? And he comes, and when he returns, he causes a lot of devastation, taking out a whole lot of people, right? And then when Satan shows up in Revelation 6 at the first seal, he's trying to look like Jesus. He's riding on a white horse. He has a crown given to him, but instead of a sword, he has a bow. Bow with no arrows. This seems to represent covenant, right? Daniel 9. The prince that shall come, right? Prince crowned, confirming a covenant for 1 week. A lot of connection to that. Right? He conquers through making deals. That's why I've always seen it growing up in cartoons and shows and movies. Satan is always trying to present to people a contract. We see this also with videos about Illuminati and Hollywood and the music industry and all this stuff, where he makes these deals with people where they sell their soul, and he will either give them talent, supernatural talent, or, mix with the audio so that they sound better than they really do, where they're lip syncing and all this other stuff, right? And he just uses this to make them rich, famous, whatever the deal is. He always gets these contracts, that require you to sign it with blood, to sell your soul and all this stuff. Because that's how Satan is. He's not, a manly man. He's a trickster. Like these Marvel movies with Loki, a little trickster, right? He would like to be more like a Thor and what have you, but he's not, right? He likes to pretend he is, but he's not. And anyway, how would he fake such a thing? So the conclusion of all this is that I think there's something more going to be happening, right? Because we know in Revelation 12, we read, if you want to go over there, you can read about the rapture happening, and then there's war in heaven, and Satan is cast down, right? So he has his abode, like in Jude, we read about how the angels have their abode, right? We know that's in the heavens, right? And among the sun, moon, and stars up there. And it's cast down. And when this happens, it might appear like some kind of alien invasion. And they might show up with something that looks like pyramids. And they'll probably say it's New Jerusalem. As we read here in Daniel 11 at verse 45, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So, in conclusion, like I was saying, I think something's going to happen. Like I was saying in the past about Jerusalem eventually going to be the city that rules over the world because of a couple of things. Like I was just reading there about the Antichrist moving his tabernacles, his abode, his place to Jerusalem, the holy mountain. All right? Because it mentions also in Daniel about how his place is destroyed. And I believe at the rapture that there's going to be sudden destruction because there's going to be war in heaven. That's why they keep talking about going to Mars, right? They say we can't go back to the moon because of the Van Allen belt. We can't get past the Van Allen belt, even though we did it several times in the past to go to the moon, supposedly. But we're going to go through that same Van Allen belt to go to Mars. Mars represents Ares, the god of war. What they're talking about is going to war, and even war in heaven. Like they're preparing for it. They're giving messages to one another when they're saying these things. They're not serious about going to Mars, but more about, hey, we got to prepare for war and even heavenly war. They're basically communicating with one another saying it's time, right? It's time that we get ready for this. The time is at hand. And that's why the world is changing the way it is. Because they're preparing for this. And kind of lost my train of thought there for a second. Give me a second to try to get it back. But so I believe this, when there's war goes on at the rapture, there's going to be a war in heaven. At the same time, I believe there's going to break out war here on earth. And I believe during that time, I believe the three city-states that are joined together, right? They're three city-states. Rome, London, and Washington, D.C. And I believe they're going to be taken out, along with even others. But those are the three main ones. And probably taken out, like New York City, for example. And they're going to take these places out. And that's why it says he's going to move his tabernacles to the holy mountain. Because I think during this whole thing, it's basically going to be world war. The West is already basically on the side of Israel. Europe not so much. But I think after those cities get destroyed, they'll blame it on Muslims in the East, Eastern allies. It's going to get them to join with Israel, not because they agree with them, but because of mutual enemies there. And what is going to happen is Israel is going to be then, at the end of the war, there is going to be the head of the nations, just like at the end of World War II, America, and I guess you could say Russia, moved up the ranks there and became superpowers, right? I believe that's what's going to happen, where other nations are all going to fall, but Israel is going to be puffed up. And part of this is because that city-state of Rome, London, and DC, and not to mention, I believe, Trump is this Antichrist fella. His abode in New York will be destroyed, and they will move to Jerusalem. So his tabernacles will be placed in the Holy Mountain, and I also believe at the same time, the war in heaven is going to cause Satan and his fallen angels to come down, and they might have these things that we would call spaceships that appear to be pyramids in shape, and they're going to be gigantic, and I think they're going to come down and may probably surround the city of Jerusalem. And that's a representation of the spiritual and physical mixing together. And Babylon is happening there, where Jerusalem, physical Jerusalem, a woman, is a harlot mixing with the beast, Satan, the serpent, and it's coming together in a one world, new world order with Israel at the head of the nation. So it looks like it's fulfilling Old Testament prophecies along with New Testament prophecies, and that it's the return of Jesus and it's the Messiah. And that's going to deceive a whole lot of people. Now, I understand even if Christians are listening to this and it all sounds kind of crazy and just out there. But while making this video, I remember movies I've seen. And I can't remember the name of the movie off the top of my head, but there was this movie where it was showing like the return of Horus or something like that, which is interesting because they call the inauguration of the president the actual raising of Osiris. Like the Osiris apparently resurrects into the new president every election. You know, that's what they claim anyway. Again, having to do with Egypt. But one of these movies, you know, had this bird-headed alien, and he showed up and there was like giant pyramid-like spaceships that were just floating above the city, which is something else that could happen. They might not even land on the ground. They may be floating above Jerusalem. All right? But it would look like, hey, this is the new city, the new capital of the world. And that's going to be a representation of the spiritual entities that ruled over Rome, London, and DC. They would all be joined together at Jerusalem. And if they were there on the ground or in the air, wouldn't matter. It would appear kind of like a crown. And obviously be convincing enough to convince the world that this is the new way things are, right? And from there, you know, you got the rest of prophecy about the whole thing being fulfilled, right? And yeah, sounds like interesting, scary stuff. Now, whether this happens right at the beginning or halfway through, I believe it's somewhere in between when the rapture happens and 3.5 years in, I believe this would happen. But it's somewhere in between that, in my opinion. But I don't know exactly when that would happen. But I guess I would connect it to a lot of things with what I made a video about when I was talking about the midpoint of the tribulation and how the stars are being cast down and all that. That might be at that point in the middle when all this officially actually takes place. So, yeah, something to think about here. I don't know if this is some strong meat of the word, if I'm even onto something with this. Because, there's a lot of people that even think that Babylon and Iraq's going to be resurrected. But I don't think a lot of people realize that Jerusalem is also built on 7 mountains. Like they have Mount of Olives right there. They have these mountains all around it where it's claimed to be built upon. And yeah, right now it may not look like the city that rules the world, but a lot of people are also coming up with conspiracies that may be true, maybe partially true, or not so true, where, the people of that place are really behind everything, right? They got their influence in the Vatican, in England, in America, right? Where it's really creating a lot of anti-Semitism. But that's all part of the plan. They actually want that. They want to create that because they want to create this war to crash everything together so that they got to build up the storm. Positive, negative charge until they get the lightning and the storm to actually happen. And then from that, they believe that their Messiah shows up when they actually get the world to come after them, and the Messiah shows up to save them, right? And that's what it's going to appear like. And they say they have 2 Messiahs, right? A Messiah ben David and Messiah ben Joseph. And that sounds like what we would call the Antichrist or beast and the false prophet. So this might be a representation of the one who comes, from what people would see as outer space, a fallen angel pretending to be an alien. And the man here, who I believe at the moment, is actually Donald Trump, the one that they gave the crown of Jerusalem to, who printed his face on the temple coin, who wants to rebuild the 3rd temple, and is very gung-ho pro-Israel. I believe he is that guy. So, this is how I see things playing out. But again, this is just a lot of thoughts that was going through my head last night, and I'm putting it now into a video. So I really need to think about it more and digest it more, and probably get feedback from whatever anybody may comment in their either objections, or maybe they see some other connections that support this. So, yeah, I might do a part 2 to this, refining it, and maybe going through it a little quicker as well. But with all that being said, I would thank you for your time. I appreciate it. If this interests you, you should check out my other videos about Revelation and Daniel, because then you'll be able to put the whole picture together. Because I made a video just talking about a timeline of the scriptures starting from the middle of Revelation, the middle of the tribulation. Because when you get that timing down, you can know when the other events happen, before the midpoint or after the midpoint, right? And it really helps clear things up. You might not get the exact timing downs of things, but when you can get the midpoint down, like, hey, it's in this area of these events mentioned in Revelation, from there, you can go, well, I know where the starting point is at opening of the sixth seal. And if this is the midpoint, all these things are happening before. And if this is after the midpoint, and we know where the end is, right? Jesus returning, we got a time frame of when those things are going on. But anyway, thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. I know this one was a longer video, and I kind of was dragging ass through it to really get to it, the point. But thank you for taking the time to hear me out, to follow along where I was going with this. If you like the ministry and you want to support it, watching the video all the way through like you did really helps. But if you could take the time to like, subscribe, with the bell icon, share the video, share the channel, interact in the comment section. These things are free, quick, and easy to do and help out a lot. And I could use all the help I could get. Also, don't forget to do what Isaiah said to do and seek out the book of the Lord and read it. If you read English, that would be the KJV. Also do what he said and put line upon line, here a little, there a little, doing what Paul said, studying that word, showing yourself approved unto God, rightly dividing the word of truth. And also do what John has Jesus recording, telling the church of Philadelphia here in Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 through 13, and keep his word, as in preserve it, protect it. Hide it in his heart, not deny his name, and he will keep you from the hour of temptation which will come upon all those that dwell upon the earth. And then he'll never be able to tell you you do err, not knowing the scriptures, which would be a good thing. And if you're able to, I know things are getting rough. I'm feeling it too. But if you're able to, there's 4 ways to donate to this ministry in the info description box if you so choose to do so. And that would help out a lot. I really make sure I can keep this going on. But through some things I've been seeing, it looks like we're going to have some kind of economic issue going into maybe the midpoint of 2026. Probably because of midterm elections and all. You know, got to create chaos and problems to make sure the dictator keeps power and keeps the Republicans in there and doing what they're doing for Agenda 2025 there to finish that out, to turn America into a dictatorship and everything. So they gotta do that kind of thing there. So none of us might be actually having anything then. I don't want to cause fear or anything, but I just kind of want to get you to, prepare. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, Have some cash. Don't keep everything in the bank, because they'll do a bail-in and you won't be able to get anything out, right? But I understand if you got to use your bank because you pay a lot of things through check or debit or something. So you just got to do a balance on those kind of things. And yeah. But I'll tell you what. If you take a little bit more time, we can pray to our Heavenly Father that he guides us in what we ought to do and what we ought not to do. Help us focus on today, but also prepare us for whatever may come for us and how many tomorrows we may have. And that he would watch over us and protect us and provide for us until he comes and gets us. And he keeps these ministries going and helping people, feeding his sheep and his people, and even reaching others to get them saved. And just to amen in Jesus' name to that. Where 2 or 3 of us are gathered together, Jesus is there with us. It's going to make sure he hears us as we support one another's prayers. Make sure we get an answer and get an answer quick. And we'll just leave it in his hands. How about that? We'll leave it in his hands and let it go and just enjoy the rest of our day. Or night, whenever you're watching this. So, with all that being said, thanks again for watching. Take care. I'll see you in the next one, and may God bless you and yours.